Welcome back. In this section, we want to understand these two key terms in statistics. They are namely population and then sample. So whenever a researcher wants to embark on a study, he may have a target group. So for example, a researcher may want to understand behavior of Ghanaians in spending money, okay? So his target group will be all citizens of Ghana. However, he would need to approach every citizen of Ghana to gather relevant information from them because he wants to understand spending habits of Ghanaians. Okay, that is the concept or the focus of his study. But in this situation, it may be very difficult or almost unlikely to have access to every Ghanaian to solicit questions from each Ghanaian for so many reasons. Maybe people may travel, you may not be able to travel the length and breadth of the nation to meet every single Ghanaian. So you will rather select portions of Ghanaians. So you may decide to select portions of Ghanaians in Accra, portions in every other region. You can choose to do that, select portions in different regions. Or you can just take Greater Accra and then use Greater Accra, and whatever findings you get, you can infer that if this information, I'm getting this from Greater Accra, then I can say this about Ghanaians because those who are in Greater Accra are also Ghanaians. So generally, what we are saying here is that population is the entire group that you are targeting, okay, or the entire group you want to study. But a sample is just a portion from that group, a portion of that target group you want to study. So as you see in these diagrams, the population here, in the case of the Ghanaian, trying to do a study on Ghanaians, this is the entire population, all Ghanaians, about 30 million Ghanaians. And here is just a small group you selected from all Ghanaians to study, because this is what is feasible. Actually, these are those you can study. If you want to embark on all this, it may be impossible, it may be very difficult, or it may be very expensive. So a population is the entire group you aim to study, and a sample is a subset or a group out of the entire group that you want to study. So if you decide to select just a portion of the entire group and then focus on that portion to study, that portion you have selected is called a sample. So you can read here for insights into what I have just shared with you on the previous slide. Now let's move to two other terms that are usually used in statistics. We already mentioned population and sample. We want to look at parameter and statistic. Let's take them in the singular form. So let's ignore the S's, okay? So we'll say parameter and statistic. We have been mentioning statistics and defining it. So why are we seeing statistic here again? So this is a word statistic being used in a different sense, okay? Now, I mentioned earlier that we have population, and then we can do a study on population, and we can also do a study on sample. Now, for example, if in your quest to understand the spending habits of Ghanaians, you think it's important for you to know the average age of Ghanaians as part of your study, once you find out the average age, if you succeed in finding the age of every single 30 million Ghanaian, and you're able to find the mean of their averages, okay, or the average age, that's characteristic you have, average age of all Ghanaians, is called a parameter. So it is a measure that is used to describe the population. So it means that whatever measure it is that you have, it is based on information you collected from every single member of the population. However, when we come to statistic, we are talking about your focus now is on the sample, okay, the sample. So your statistic measure is a measure, okay, it's a form of measure that is computed from your sample data. So when we talk about the word statistic, in this sense now, it is a measure that is focused on data collected from the sample. So once you do not collect data from all Ghanaians, but you use, for example, let's say you use working class Ghanaians, you decide to use working class Ghanaians, so people between age 18 and 60. This is a group out of all Ghanaians. It's not the entire population, all right? Once you consider just a subset or a group out of the entire population, and you do a study on them, and in this particular scenario, you're able to find their average age, that measure, whatever measure you get as being their average age is called a statistic, because it is a measure that is describing the sample. And then a parameter is a measure that describes the population. So this is a distinction between parameter and statistic. Now, if you look at this picture we have here, you can see that we have an entire group of people here. So let's just say these are all Ghanaians, okay? All Ghanaians. And then we are trying to measure their diastolic blood pressure. So we find out that the mean blood pressure of all Ghanaians, if we succeeded in collecting information on the blood pressure of every single Ghanaian, in this example, the mean is 78, all right? However, look at these samples. There are 3 different samples that have been collected from this entire population. So this is a smaller sample. It's quite evident that the number of people collected here is small. This is quite a good number of sample, but this is a greater number of sample, okay? So when you compare these 3 samples, you realize that they have different means. Definitely so, because number one, the units in the sample, the individuals in there are different, and they have different ages. Those collected here are different from those collected here, and also different from those collected here. Secondly, those collected here are fewer than those collected here. So we also exposed to having such differences in their mean because of these 2 factors. But you realize that the mean of the entire population is 78, and the mean of these 3, the smaller the sample, the farther away the mean is from the true population, which is 78. So you realize that as you can see, for the biggest sample, the mean is 75, which is very close to 78. And for the smallest sample, the mean is 67, which is quite farther away from 78. So usually in any statistical study you're embarking on, if you can use the entire population, that is the best. It is just sometimes impracticable or sometimes too expensive or very inconvenient. And that is why statisticians or researchers will resort to using a sample. So even if you decide to use a sample, you should make sure that your sample is very representative and the number you are using in your sample is a good number that should give you results that are very close to the actual population results, okay? So in this case, you realize that if you have this sample gives you a closer characteristic. That is, the mean being 75 is closer to 78 as compared to this sample whose mean is 67, which is quite far away from 78. So here are some examples of population parameter and then sample statistic. So in this case, you have here the mean or the average. It could be the average age. It could be the average income end. It could be the mean of anything you may want to study in a particular population. So here we have the population parameter. So this mean, which is the Greek letter mu, is representing the mean of the entire population. That is when information has been taken from every single member of the population. However, this mean here representing the mean of the sample is the mean of just a group that have been collected from the entire population. All right, so it is only a representative part of the entire population, and we call it the sample mean. There are other forms of characteristics you may be interested in studying. You may want to study the variance, you may want to look at the size of the population. So if, for example, if you're using the Ghanaian population and the population size is 30 million, and you're using a sample of, say, 100,000 people, your N, big N here is your 30 million, which is the entire population, and your small N here is your 100,000, which is your sample size. Okay. So you can read everything I have been saying is what is described here in words. In your own study time, do well to read to further understand and come up with as many questions as possible when we meet in class for clarification. We will end the session here. Let's meet next time to understand what variable means.